Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are tuning in. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Brahma Viharas Equanimity, and this is a Q&A session. So got a action-packed episode here. I got several questions sent to me this week. Thank you for that, by the way. I do appreciate the questions coming in. So if there are any questions or comments about anything that you've heard in this episode or in any of the past episodes or regarding meditation in general, please do send those along. Happy to answer those as I get them. So I think I'm just going to jump right in. And I'm going to start with the questions that I received pertaining to equanimity first. And then I'll go into a few questions that I received simply pertaining to meditation practice in general. And I think that'll fill up the time that we have here. So the first question I got is it really possible to free oneself from fixed views? Is it possible to live a life where we're not attached to it is this or it is that, it is not this, it is not that, those types of views? I I think it is possible. I'm not sure if it's possible to have no view. I'm not sure what that would look like. No pun intended. um, but I think the idea is to free oneself from our attachment to our views. And so when we do the equanimity practices that I've been outlining thus far, we offer the phrase to our own heart, may I be free from preference and prejudice. That is pointing to a view. May I be free from these views that I've been born into, that I've been culturally conditioned to hold. May I see those. And in that seeing, we start to step out of that. We start to step away from those views. As soon as we start to see them, when we are attached to a view, we don't really recognize that that's a view, that that's a particular way of seeing the world. We just think, well, that's the way the world is. That the world is X because that's how we've always seen it, that's how we've been taught to see it, and that's what we believe to be the case. And it is that way with every view. Every view, if we're attached to it, if we're living our life through that perspective, it's very difficult to see that it's actually an artificial composite given to us by our upbringing, by our education, by social media, by our political ideology, which is in itself a view, but it gets reinforced, self-reinforcing view. Most of them are, actually. So as soon as we step outside of that, you start to see, oh, that's actually not the way the world is. That's actually just the way I've been taught to see the world. When that starts to happen, when we start to objectify our view that way, we start to separate from it. And so the beauty in that, the beauty in letting our view drop, is that we're now free to experience other perspectives equally, or at least we're free to see the way other people see the world, with interest, with curiosity. Prior to that, when we're seeing the world through a particular perspective or view, if you will, and we're just able to see that way of seeing the world, then when we meet another person and their view is opposing the one that we're using to see the world, tension arises, dissonance, aversion, arguments, fights, violence, so forth. So by recognizing that our view is just a lens in which we experience the world from, it's not truth. When we recognize that, when we separate from that view, we can now see the opposing view with more of a sense of curiosity, more of a sense of, that's interesting. I wouldn't have thought to see it in that way. Now, this is fine. That's all fine, unless the opposing views are causing pain and suffering for people. So that's really quite challenging. And there we don't really need to see that view with curiosity. We just see the harm that it's doing. Now, in experiencing that, in seeing that, we are a lot less likely to fall into emotional reactivity if our view isn't punching that. If we've actually seen through our own perspective, then when we see somebody else's perspective causing pain or suffering, racism, discrimination, sexism, xenophobia, so forth, when we come across that type of perspective, we can move forward for that person with compassion. That doesn't mean we say that their behavior is okay. In fact, we can do the exact opposite. We can move forward to help them see that they're hurting people with compassion. Again, that we don't condone behavior that's causing transgressions or that's causing pain or suffering. But if we've seen through our view, if we've released attachment to the way we see the world, then we can move forward in compassion. We can move forward with loving kindness, even for people who are causing suffering towards others. So is it possible to free oneself from fixed views? That's the question. And I think it is. And I think that's why we do these practices of equanimity, is to see that we're actually experiencing the world through perspectives, through beliefs, through structures that have been handed down to us. And then again, we see those, we start to be able to step away from it, and we can literally see it arising. Oh, that's that view, that's that perspective, that's that way of seeing that I've been taught. That's not the way the world actually is. The Buddha called that recognizing the suchness of reality. The suchness of reality, the way the world actually presents itself prior to belief systems, prior to views. So I hope that was helpful to the questioner. I hope that you found that beneficial. And those others who are watching, I hope you found that at least entertaining, if not helpful. So the next question I got is because I'm been talking about seeing through our belief structures. And so somebody sent me a question, well, what is the difference between belief and faith? So the way I think of this is that belief, when we hold on to a belief structure, it again creates a certain way of seeing the world. And really it really inhibits our ability to open up to what the present moment is actually bringing us. So when something arises that affirms our belief structure, we feel attracted to that. We want more of that. We want to go with that person, or we want to read that book because it affirms our belief system. We see this with these bubbles now. And this is one of the reasons why the world is so divided, is because people are so keen on just affirming their political ideologies over and over again. So they only read and pay attention to one side of any argument that's arising politically. And so they keep affirming their belief, affirming their belief, affirming their belief, and the other group is affirming their beliefs, affirming their beliefs, affirming their beliefs, and then there's no interaction there. And so this really is, well, we can see what's happening worldwide, the type of suffering that's causing. Faith is actually quite different than that. Faith actually allows one to open completely. If one has a lot of faith, one can open to the present moment completely. Faith that whatever's arising in the present moment is what needs to be experienced. Faith doesn't, it's not a lens to see the world through. It's not a particular view, but it's more of an opening to what's arising. At least that's how I am defining those terms when I teach. So faith and belief, they are, the way I'm using those words, quite different. I have faith that when I practice loving kindness, compassion, equanimity, and joy, that those emotional qualities arise for me. And that faith is reinforced because when I practice them and then I interact with people, those qualities are in fact actually there. And so faith is more of this, again, this opening and embracing of whatever's arising in the present moment. Now, we can do practices that affirm that. But I'm also open to other views. I'm open to seeing how other people, how their practices manifest for them. It could be quite different. And so I have faith that all of that will come to me when it's ready to, if it ever comes to me, if it's ever ready to, so forth. I don't know if that's making sense or if that's answering the question. If there are any, if you'd like to follow up the question, if the questioner is listening with another question about that, do send that along. So sometimes I get these questions and they're a bit challenging to answer in this modality. So, but I hope that addressed it. Belief versus faith. Belief systems tend to clash against other belief systems. Views, perspectives, they all have that quality. We get attached to them, and then that shuts us down. You can see this actually in the pro-choice, pro-life argument. You see this all the time, how people who are pro-life, so to speak, they won't even listen to the alternatives because they have a belief system that they need to adhere to and feel validated. And the pro-choice, same thing. They have a belief system. They won't listen to any opposing argument. They just have a belief system, and that's the way the world is, and end of story. It shuts one down to the subtleties of the present moment. Any kind of nuances in the argument is completely shut down because we're holding on to a belief structure. One really great way to test if you're doing that is you can see if in your inner dialogue, if you're thinking, it must be this way, it can't be that way. If your inner dialogue is saying that, it must be X, it can't be Y, that's a pretty good sign that you're holding on to a belief system and that you're probably not allowing all of the nuances of the argument to be heard. So a good it might be wise at that point to allow the belief system to at least temporarily subside and open up a little bit. Have faith. That's where the faith comes in. Open up, have faith to the present moment, and listen to all of the nuances. Listen to the present moment uh, reasoning that's being brought forth by an opposing party, opposing. I guess they might have been seen as opposing before we allow that belief system to subside. So we meet the person where they are as a human being, human to human, rather than belief system to belief system, which usually ends up in an argument or a fight. We meet the person where they are as a human being. We see beyond the belief system and recognize the human spirit. Then we can have a conversation out of loving kindness, out of compassion, out of equanimity. Hopefully maybe some joy in there arising from this interaction between spirit there, spirit here. We're interacting, conversing, trying to come out with an outcome that works for everyone, like that. So I think that's maybe a more eloquent way of stating what I'm meaning when I say belief system, what I'm meaning when I say faith. Okay, next question. How to practice equanimity and fight for social justice at the same time? Very good question, right? If we're practicing, really practicing being free from preference or prejudice, we're really practicing letting go of our views, our belief systems, then what about moving forward for social justice? And I actually already touched on this a little bit at the beginning of the episode, but I'll come back to it then. So when we free ourselves from how we want things to be, that's our preferences, or prejudices, how we've been taught that things ought to be. When we free ourselves from that, then when we see an injustice arise, when we see somebody causing harm to another, or when we see a system oppressing a people, we can then move forward free from our emotional reactivity. It's our preferences that give rise to our anger. It's our view of how we think things ought to be that give rise to our rage. And so the second phrase of the equanimity offerings, may I know things just as they are, free from our anger, free from our rage. Because when we let that go, and we move forward from a place of equanimity, we actually move forward with a lot more power than our anger or rage would ever allow. Because when we move forward, when our motion forward for social change is fueled by anger, it's okay, I'm going to come back to that. I guess the better word is when we move forward for social change with our actions laced with rage, or with our actions steeped in that anger, we're only going to have temporary success at best. We might win the battle, but the war will rage on. Because we move forward we move forward with our actions laced with those qualities, those emotional reactivity qualities, we're going to cause an equal and opposite reaction. So if we move forward for social justice with our hearts steeped in anger, with our actions steeped in that rage, then actions will come back at us. Now that might be 100 years from now. 200 years from now, 400 years from now. But eventually, anger comes back. And the pendulum keeps swinging back and forth, back and forth. And each time the pendulum goes from one side to the other, more people suffer, more people die. So with the practice of equanimity, we can actually really move forward with social change or for social change. Now, that anger we feel might be very justified. We might feel rage, and that rage might be coming from a very pure place. That might be what's needed to be felt. And I don't want to invalidate anger. Anger is a very pure human emotion and is very justified, and particularly in the current world crisis. So, but then the idea then is to allow the anger to arise, recognize it as an emotion, and feel it, and then let it go. And then move forward with equanimity. After the emotional reaction has passed, then move forward. Then we can see things as they are. Then we can know things as they are. Then we're not carrying our preferences and prejudices with us. We're simply moving forward to correct the imbalances of the current situation, whatever it is, whether it's systemic racism, whether it's xenophobia, whether it's simply whatever, doesn't matter what the situation is, but moving forward free from that emotional reactivity, because then there's no ground for the equal and opposite viewpoint to stand on. We don't fuel the reactivity that will come back at us. We take away that opportunity for any opposing view. And so if we really want lasting change, if we really want change that will stick without the lashback, without the pendulum swinging the other way, we move forward free from our preferences and prejudices. We move forward simply to move forward to alleviate suffering. So, if I'm correct in my note-taking here, I think that's all of the questions about equanimity that I received. I did receive a couple of questions about meditation practice itself, so I would like to address those now. The first question, does sentimentality have a place in mindfulness practice? For example, we're doing these mindfulness practices, we're resting with the breath, resting with the body, really practicing being in the present moment experience. So what about remembering all of those lovely past memories? Looking through the photo album, or remembering last summer at the beach before the lockdown. Whatever it is that we want to maybe perhaps take joy in that. There's nothing wrong with that. And sure, that has a place in mindfulness practice. So let's look at that for a moment. So maybe we're, I don't know, in the kitchen making a sandwich, and we're, whatever it is, the sandwich we're making, maybe the smell of mustard hits our nose, and we remember, oh, right, mustard, the smell of mustard. That reminds me of Coney Island 2 years ago. I was on the beach. It was such a beautiful night. Okay, then we're lost in thought, right? At that point, we're no longer in the present moment. You probably aren't even seeing the bread of the sandwich that you're making, but your mind is just off in that memory, right? We've all had that experience. Okay, that's not mindfulness. Nothing wrong with that, but it's just not being mindful. But there is a way of uh, delighting in our previous memories in a mindful way. And so maybe you're making that sandwich, the smell of mustard hits your nose, your mind starts to remember Coney Island or whatever it is. And then you think, well, let's make this into a practice. So take a moment, take a few moments, feel your breath, feel your body, listen to the sounds of the present moment. Or if you're still making the sandwich, looking at the grains of the bread and spreading, continuing to spread the mustard, just doing it very mindfully. And at the same time, allow the memory to be there. Allow the emotion from the memory to arise as well. And so now you're really in the present moment with the experience of remembering, with the experience of this sentimentality, if you will, like that. So you can actually make that into a practice. Because whenever we're remembering something, we're actually remembering it right now, in the present moment, right? I mean, let's say take the same example. The mustard smell brings you back to Coney Island 2 years ago. Now you can't go up to Nathan's in Coney Island and order another order of French fries, right? Because you're not there anymore. That was 2 years ago. So the memory is still in the past, but you are right here in the present moment remembering that. So that's the idea, is to stay with the experience of sentimentality, allowing the emotions to arise. Those can be really beautiful emotions, kind of a melancholy almost, like a joy, happiness, sadness mix. It can be really lovely. Stay in the present moment with it, like that. Now, also, this is kind of related to another question that I get sometimes. What about planning? How does one plan for the future and be mindful? And it's kind of the same thing. Now, I recommend for planning that people actually set aside a time to plan. Let's say, for example, you have a vacation time coming up next month. So let's say set aside Tuesday from 7:30 to 9 p.m. I'll only plan this vacation. And then turn the phone off at 7:30 on Tuesday. Turn the phone off. Open your computer if that's how you do your planning, if that's how you book your travel. You're on the computer, you're typing, feeling the keys underneath the pad of the fingers, hearing the keys, seeing the website of the travel company appear, checking the price, so forth. You're really in the present moment with the planning. Then the mind might think, oh, I wonder if I really have time to take this vacation. I've had so much time off with the lockdown, and maybe it's not a good idea. Those are distractions. That's thinking. Think about that later. Let that go. Right now, you're honoring the time that you set aside for planning this vacation. And then you go back to, that's just thinking, let those thoughts go, come back, hearing the fingers on the keys, seeing the screen, whatever's arising, really engaging in the planning, like that. Then when 9 o'clock comes around, even if your vacation isn't completely planned yet, that's fine. Close the computer, you're finished, you've honored that time, and then move on to whatever the next present moment activity is, like that. So mindfulness can be practiced all of the time. Whether you're remembering something in the past, that's okay because it's still a present moment experience. If you're planning something for the future, making that planning into a present moment practice. Cooking dinner, same thing. You don't think about how good or bad the food's going to taste, if your company's going to like it or not, or if you're going to have leftovers. You don't worry about any of that. You're in the present moment with cooking. You're hearing the butter sizzle on the frying pan. You're chopping the onions. You're with the eyes tearing, and maybe you open the window to alleviate that. And you're just in the present moment with cooking, like that. Not worried about the outcome, not worried about next week, not worried about the business meeting in a few days. You're just there, like that. Okay. Last question of the episode. Okay. So this person wrote in, I've copied a bit of the question here. I'm just going to read it. During meditation, part of me wants to stop and write things down and create. This is after periods of meditation, and part of me wants to continue the practice and dig deeper in that moment. What should I do? Okay. So if one is inspired, if you're really inspired to continue practicing meditating, I recommend that. Strike while the iron is hot. The creativity that's arising during meditation, and this, particularly if you're a creative type, a musician, a painter, a poet, a writer, often creative sparks arise during meditation. And that's actually because when we're practicing clearing the mind of thoughts, we're tapping into the creative source. So everything that is manifest is created first from the ground of silence. So without getting a little too metaphysical there, we practice in meditation letting thoughts go, or recognizing that we're thinking, putting those aside, and sometimes we strike that silent space, and the spark of creativity arises from that, resting in that silent space there. Very common. So if you can, rest in that too. Consider that just another experience that's arising. Let that go. Coming back to the meditation practice. It will be there. And what I've noticed in my own practice is that when I'm meditating and I feel a creative spark arise, and I feel the urge to get up and manifest whatever's arising there, that very often it's not done yet. Very often, if I say, oh, that's what that is, I can let that go and come back and meditate. Then it might come up again in a different form, and I let that go, and I come back and meditate some more. Then by the time I'm finished with the meditation, the bell rings, or I'm finished meditating, whatever, and I get up, it's actually taken on a bit of a different form, maybe a more complete form, but at least a different and sometimes more evolved form of creation at that point. So maybe the first impulse is just the beginning of the birth of what wants to be created. So allowing one to rest in that process, that in itself can be quite an interesting meditation. Now, also, what can be done, this is how the book that I just finished, A Voice from the Ever-Change, I wrote a good portion of this book in this method where I would meditate and keep my journal book with me in the meditation. And then when things would arise, I would immediately write them down, which goes pretty much counter to what I just said. But the difference is that I would set aside a practice just for that. And it would be in addition to my other meditation practices. So I would do my regular meditation practices in the morning, and then I would add a practice in the afternoon, a half an hour meditation that was specifically there in my schedule for the writing purpose. And so then I would have that intention in mind, set the journal there, start meditating, and then whenever things came up pertaining to the book that I thought would be useful, I would then write it in the journal. And that's basically how the book was written. So what I recommend is to honor your meditation schedule, but if you feel so inspired, maybe set aside 1 or 2 sessions a week Could be more, could be less, but maybe 1 or 2 a week is a good place to start. And where you just explore the creative process. And so the idea there is to really keep your meditation practice as the main practice, but having this other creative exploration there as a part of the practice as well. Okay, that concludes this Q&A session, Equanimity, the Brahma, Viharas. I will be back tomorrow, Thursday, guiding meditation on equanimity, designed to cultivate equanimity for groups of people. Now, tomorrow's practice will be somewhat of a departure from offering phrases to other people and to our own heart. This practice that I'll be offering tomorrow comes from the Tibetan tradition, and it's specifically designed for equanimity for groups of 3 people. It's a beautiful practice. I really love this one. So yeah, hopefully we'll see you all there. Please stay safe, stay healthy, stay well, and I will see you all tomorrow.